What are the pros and cons of APR, or annual percentage rate? My name's Evan Kaufman, your VLN educator, here to help explain. We're first going to look at the pros of APR, and then we're going to talk about some of the cons or considerations you need to take into account when looking at APR. The big pro of APR, for annual percentage rate, is that it tries to take into account not just the interest rate on your loan, but all the closing costs and fees associated with it, so long as you keep that loan for 30 years. What APR does is it effectively says, okay, your interest rate is, let's say, hypothetically 5%, but you have so many thousands of dollars in fees and charges up front that should be calculated in APR for taking that loan out. We're going to take those and divide those out over the 30 years and factor that into the interest rate. So theoretically, if someone is charging you more in points and everything, your APR should be a little bit higher. That's a pro. It tries to take all that into account for a 30-year extension of that loan, meaning that if you intend on keeping that loan for 30 years and not paying it off by either selling it or financing it, APR can be a great example to use when getting a mortgage. We're going to talk about the cons or considerations you need to have. If you are not planning to keep a home or potentially refinance it over a 30-year period, APR can distort the deal that you're getting. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, if you are going to happen to sell your home or refinance it within 30 years, let's say for a lot of our clients we work for happen to be military clients, they might only own that home or they're potentially going to refinance it within the next 3 to 5, 7 years, somewhere in that range. That is not uncommon at all. So looking at a 30-year horizon can be a little bit deceiving. Why is that? Because again, APR takes those closing costs and associated costs and spreads them out over 30 years. But if you're going to sell the home or again refinance the home within that 30-year window, technically that APR is going to be artificially lower than what it will be in reality. Let's say that you took out a mortgage again at 5%. And let's say you had a 1% charge in origination, underwriting, costs that would go into APR. Let's just say they're loan costs from your lender. For APR calculation, your interest rate wouldn't be 5%. It would be 5%, and then you'd take that 1% and you would go ahead and you would amortize that over 30 years. So effectively, you would see that broken down as a fraction of a percent, 1% divided by 30. So you'd have like a 5.03, very small APR rate, but it would be slightly higher than the 5%. And you go, oh, that looks like a great rate. And let's compare that to, let's say you had no finance points or charges and the interest rate was 5.5%. And the APR was effectively 5.5 or darn close to it. Now APR factors in a couple other charges that will most likely be in there, so it'll be a hair higher, but let's just say it's 5% for this scenario. Well, if I saw that, oh, I'm paying that one finance point or that 1 point in origination fees or whatnot, and it's keeping my rate at 5%, that looks better than that 5.5% rate. Even though it's 5.1, whatever it is, or 5.05, hey, that's better than the 5.5 rate over here. However, the 5.5, let's say it didn't have any of those charges. It didn't have that 1% because the APR is still it's right at 5.5 because it didn't have to amortize any costs around it. Let's say you went to sell that home within 1 year. So this is a prime example I like to give. If you sell that home in a year, that loan that had the 5% interest rate, you sell it, you still paid that 1 point up front, that one finance point. So in a year, you effectively paid 6% in interest over it, not the 5.0 whatever amortized over 30 years because you sold or you refinanced that home in a year. So they went out the window. So the reality is your true interest rate over the year that you own the home was the 5% rate plus what you paid in fees. It was actually closer to 6%, higher than the 5.5 here. Whereas if you went to sell that home in a year and you had a 5.5% interest rate, and let's say it had very minimal costs on top of that, so the APR was as close to 5.5% as it gets, then when you go to sell it in a year, you would have paid 5.5% in interest. So you actually would have had a better deal doing the 5.5% interest rate than the 5% with the one finance point on top of it. And APR over here then just tricked you that it was better. Now, that's an extreme example for it, but where we typically see that is that you might be paying one full finance point or you're paying higher origination charges to get your rate maybe 0.25% better than another one, and you're paying like almost 2 percentage points worth over here. Well, it usually then makes sense that if you might sell or you might refinance a home in the next 5 to 10 years, generally that APR can be distorted quite a bit by heavy point buying down. Remember, points are where you're paying money to get a lower rate or higher origination fees. It might look like you're getting a better APR, but if you think through the math of if I go ahead and actually refinance or sell in the next, say, 5, 7, 10 years, you'll often see that APR is drastically distorted. So, moral of the story is, if you see yourself keeping a home for a full 30 years and not selling it or refinancing it over that 30-year period, APR can be a fantastic place to look to get a true overall cost for the loan. Yes, there's still some other ways to try to distort it by what lenders put in for that. But for the most part, okay, it can be a good thing. I will agree with that. 30 years, heck, even 25 years. It's pretty close. By then, you've amortized out most things. But if you're looking like you might sell or refinance your home within a 30-year or 25-year period, APR can be a little distorted. And that's why you always want to pay attention to what we like to call the three-way teeter-totter. Sadly, to compare rates and compare deals that you have on a mortgage, it's not just as easy as looking at one number, at APR or at interest rate. You got to look at three of them in this three-way teeter-totter. That's the interest rate you're getting. That's any lender fees. Those could be origination charges, processing fees. There's multiple different names, which is lender fees and charges for doing the loan. And then number three, finance points. That's you paying money up front to get a lower rate. You got to look at all three of those and balance those out together to see what's really best for your situation. We have some other really good videos on that. Check those out on our resource page. We call it the three-way teeter-totter, the three ways that you get charged by lenders. Hope this helps to explain a little bit more about APR and the pros and when it can be very useful, but then also the cons and what you want to consider on how it could technically be distorted to make you feel like you're getting a good deal, when in reality, you might not. My name's Evan Copping, and thanks for watching. Take care.